Hello, I'm Brian Scordato, and this is the Idea to Startup podcast brought to you by Tacklebox. If you've got a startup idea you want to validate, now is actually a great time to do it. We just finished up the 22nd cohort, all virtual, and it was incredibly successful. Our founders made a ton of progress. It can actually be a little bit easier to reach and interact with customers these days if you're solving a problem they really want solved. Conversely, it's going to be way tougher to get customers' attention if what you're doing isn't all that important to them. Either way, you'll get transparency into whether your idea has legs. If interested, our next cohort starts June 15th, again, all virtual, and you can apply at gettacklebox.com. On to today. We've got a real treat, just a crazy good podcast. I spoke with Daina Trout, the founder of Health-Ade Kombucha. You've probably had Health-Ade. It's the delicious kombucha that comes in the darker bottles that kind of look like shampoo bottles and have that big anchor on them. It's one of the fastest growing beverage brands in the world and has raised about $50 million in capital. And luckily, you can buy it direct from their website during these weird times. But what you almost certainly didn't know is that Health-Ade came from three friends in an entrepreneurship club who were originally working on a cure for baldness. The story is amazing, and Daina's a special founder. Listen to how she approaches and solves difficult problems. Everything has a bias towards action and is done with incredible resolve. Enjoy, and I hope you're all safe and happy. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Sure, no problem. Happy to be here.
So I think a cool place to start with any of our founders is the story of how the idea came to be. But I think for you in particular, kind of reading up on your background, it seemed like you were sort of subconsciously preparing to start Health-Ade for a long time. So maybe we start back as far as makes sense and talk a little bit about like how you got interested in health and diet and all of that in the first place.
Sure. It's a good thing to start with, but from a conscious level, I will just say I didn't know I was going to be starting a kombucha company or making kombucha for sale until about 2 weeks before we sold our first bottle. So all of this prep work is great context, but in hindsight, it looks all sort of perfect by design. But in reality, it was really sort of, shown to me in my journey, not so much something I had control over.
Connect the dots backwards.
Yeah, exactly. So I have always been a person that's interested in food and wellness from food, really as early as high school, I would say. And for sure, it has to do with the fact that, food's like good, real food has always been a part of my upbringing. My mom always made incredible, balanced, whole food meals my whole life. So I'm sure that has something to do with it. And I naturally, just kind of fell in love with food more and more as I grew older. I went in undergrad, I went to Georgetown in DC and I was pre-med. So I think I was starting my journey there, really, my journey on, I guess, health. And I wanted to be a doctor at first. And I really was doing everything I could to get into a good medical school. So I was like an EMT and was trying to do all of the like medical school, extracurricular activities and stuff like that to get in. And it wasn't until a couple months before I graduated that I chose not to go to graduate school for medical and instead go for nutrition. So it was sort of a last minute pivot, but still nutrition is pretty connected to health and it's just a little bit of a different application of it. So I ended up going to graduate school right after undergrad for nutritional biochemistry. And I thought I was going to be a lifelong diehard academic researcher. And I spent about 2 years doing my PhD and I was studying interesting things. I was studying like basically nutraceutical level amounts of normal vitamins and how they impact cardiovascular disease. So I was interested in it and I was good at it, but it turns out I hate the lab. I hated working with the rats. I hated not like getting outdoors. I wasn't interacting with enough people. I didn't like fit in for sure. Although that's kind of always been my story. So 2 years into grad school, of a program that probably would have taken anywhere from 5 to 8 years long, I pivoted again and decided I didn't want to go the route of academia, even though I was passionate about food. At the same time, that I was in grad school, I was just really into cooking. I was studying food,
Mm.
sure, but I was really into cooking with it, like making my own sort of concoctions and serving them, not just like food for dinner, but also like health concoctions. Like I would make like health tonics when people were sick with like ginger and maca root and all this kind of stuff. So I was starting to get into a
Wow.
little bit of like food, how food meets medicine. But it was
Mm.
just play. And part of it was learning how to ferment. And so I was fermenting all kinds of things in
Mhm.
grad school, including kombucha. So that's where I got introduced to kombucha. And I made my own, but I didn't think it was going to be my identity for sure 15 years later. And I certainly didn't think there was
Wow.
anything special about kombucha above and beyond any other fermented food. Like I was making my own kefir.
Really?
Yeah. So it was just sort of one of the things in my, kitchen cabinet, so to speak. I
Huh.
always made really good, like good quality and high quality food. So my SCOBY came from like the best source I could find. I always used like the best quality teas. And so, but that was the case also with my kefir and, even where
Mm.
I got my strawberries. So that was just sort of my thing. So I ended up pivoting, not doing my PhD, doing a master's instead, and went to do another master's in public health because I thought being around people as it relates to health is where I want to go. So I did public health, and I just basically was like kind of, I guess you could say, uh, I don't know if the word meandering is the right word, but it wasn't like a very clear path on where I was going. I kind of kept educating myself to realize that wasn't where I wanted to end up. And of course, tacking up a pretty good bill as a result. So when I finished graduate school, 6 years later, sure, I had 2 master's degrees, but I also had like a mortgage worth of debt. And so that really directed me
Mm.
a certain way when I started looking for a job, because the typical public health job was not very lucrative, at least at the start. So I was
Mhm.
looking for something that could use my, skill sets and experience and knowledge, but was also going to pay me enough to basically live with my bills that I had,
Mm.
created. And so that's where I landed my first and only job, basically. I mean, sure, I had side jobs while I worked, but like I landed my first and only job after grad school. I moved to LA with my boyfriend, who was the co-founder, but we still didn't know it yet.
Mm.
And we started, and I started working for a pharmaceutical company. So obviously that's a little bit different
Huh.
than like holistic nutrition, but I got a job selling nutraceuticals. So like basically pharmaceutical grade vitamins, but really high doses.
Mm.
And they were being used to help certain aspects of cardiovascular health. So it was actually pretty related to my background. And,
Yeah.
they were going to help pay some of my graduate school bills. I mean, it was pretty awesome, the package
Mm.
I was getting. So I was happy to sign up and work for a pharmaceutical company, especially since it made sense for my background. So that's how I ended up there.
Mhm.
And I worked there for 5 years before starting Health-Ade. And essentially, that job taught me a few things. First, I
Mhm.
I definitely felt misaligned from like a value perspective of working for a pharmaceutical company, but being so passionate about real food and food healing.
Mm.
But more so, I learned good things. I learned that I was a really good leader. Like I moved around the company quite a bit and into
Mm.
leadership pretty quickly. And I learned that I was a good leader. I learned that I liked leading and that people responded to my level of leadership.
Mm.
And I had an opportunity to learn a lot about people and leading people because I got this like weird internship for a year as a change agent. And without getting into too much detail,
Mm.
basically, I had the opportunity to improve, like my job for a year was to improve engagement of the pharmaceutical company's employees. So I switched from being like a
Mm.
salesperson to basically selling the company to its own employees.
Wow.
And I just had the opportunity to basically meet over, I don't know, hundreds of teams and hundreds of different leaders. And I got to talk with them, and I just learned so much. It was like a crash course in productivity and engagement, of what makes teams click and what teams work and what teams don't and why. And what's the real effect of micromanagement and what's the real effect of good coaching and
Mm.
good leadership. So I learned that like in a matter of a year, and I walked away being like, oh my gosh, I feel like I have the keys to leading a strong team and an effective
Wow.
team. So that was a driver for me to quit, because the second
Huh.
piece of it was I was so ready to start something. And I don't know where this came from,
Huh.
this itch, but it grew. It wasn't like I woke up one day unhappy. It grew. I was just sort of unfulfilled, and the next day I was more unfulfilled, and by year 5 I was like, I
Mm.
can't get out of bed without tears flowing from my eyes because I was so
Wow.
unhappy or something. And when I dug into what it was that I was unhappy about, it was that I wanted to find my way to the top and like build my own business and make a mark that was on my own terms. And there was no way I was going to do that in my job. So,
Really
so
interesting.
I was feeling this way. I reached out to my best friend and my husband at the time, and I was like, "This is how I'm feeling." And they too were feeling the same way, but for different reasons. They were in different jobs, but all felt the same way, like unfulfilled and really kind of ready to start something and ready to make a name for themselves. But we had nothing. We had no money. I mean, like, you know, we were living fine, but like paycheck to paycheck, you know, like nothing really being saved up, like just sort of early on in our careers.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided to start an entrepreneur club, and that's really where we ended up on Health-Ade. I'm happy to jump into like kind of how we landed on Health-Ade after that, but that's sort of the background of how we got to, okay, the three of us are sitting at a table talking about business.
That's so interesting. I mean, that's such an incredible opportunity to learn, one, that you're a leader, and then to like be able to like bounce from, it sounded like a bunch of these topics where you're talking about like understanding how to make teams click is like, what's more important than that for an entrepreneur? Understanding about time management, about micromanagement.
Yeah.
That's like really, really great experience in such a condensed amount of time.
Yeah.
That's great.
I would say it's served me so well. Like I look back at the pharmaceutical job and I see it as a very, very important stepping stone to where I went. Without it, I wouldn't have learned all of that, but I also wouldn't have honed in on my own skills and like, you know, fine-tuned those. So, you know, wherever you are, those of you listening, you know, it doesn't mean that's at all where you're going to end up. And sometimes those things you're doing that may seem very unrelated actually might be quite related and necessary for, you know, your ultimate sort of work that still lies ahead. At least for me, I look back at GSK and I'm very grateful for that 5 years. GSK was the company. I'm very grateful for that 5 years I had there. And then of course for that cool opportunity to be change agent.
Yeah. And you kind of have, at this point, I'm sort of visualizing your experience as this Venn diagram that becomes pretty unique, where you've got the like pure science background of it. You've got the, I'll call it like the cooking background, or you making your own food. And then you've got the more corporate side. And there probably aren't a lot of people who have those three skill sets or knowledge bases.
Yeah. And it was not like by design, right? Like I kind of went into nutrition and health because I was good at science and I liked it. So I just kind of kept studying it. And I ended up in a place by continuing to pursue just, I guess you could call it excellence, or like getting better just each day in whatever it is I was doing. And I sort of ended up in a place where then it became clear. But it wasn't like I had this vision from the beginning, as we talked about.
Cool. And I do want to dig in a little bit, because I think we get a lot of people who reach out who sound similar to what I would imagine you sounded like at the time, where you were sort of like, I want to do something. I don't know if it's bigger or like make a bigger impact, but like there was clear ambition there. And we get people like that who are like, I don't necessarily know what I want to do, but I know I got to do my own thing.
Yeah.
So I think digging into how you made that decision on Health-Ade, or like how it got to that point is actually super relevant.
I get that a lot too from people I speak with, and we were in that spot 100%. And yes, my background was in food and stuff, so maybe it makes sense that I landed on kombucha. But if you were to be interviewing Justin or Vanessa, the two other co-founders, Justin's a musician. So really, you'd talk to him and be like, how the F did you get to kombucha? You know?
What type of music?
He's a guitarist, and that's what he went to school for to train. But he was in music production and engineering and like songwriting and stuff in LA at the time that we started this.
Wow.
But really unrelated to kombucha. I mean, the only connection he had to kombucha was that I made it at home, and because he was my boyfriend, he was forced to drink it, you know? No, he liked it. I'm kidding. And then Vanessa, her background's really like she worked at the same pharmaceutical company I worked at. But she stayed in sales the whole time. And, you know, she went to business school. So she was sort of on a different path, not, you know, more business related for sure, but not at all related to food. So again, the way we landed on kombucha had not a lot to do with my past. I think it's more that we did something and made it work than we did the right thing. So I'll get to that. But basically what we did, because the three of us were feeling that way, we don't know what it is, but we know we want to do something, and we know we're entrepreneurs at heart. Like we know it. The other challenge was we didn't have any cash, but we didn't know that was a challenge at the time as much. So that naivete was good. We sat down at a table basically once a week because we all still had our jobs. And we would spend the whole afternoon in our entrepreneur club. And what we would bring up were ideas for a business, and we would focus it in on like, what are pain points we can solve. So throughout the day, throughout the week, the idea was that you'd write down all the things that were annoying or that pained you. And then we would like talk through them and figure out if there was some kind of solution we could have to any of these things. And so we came up with all kinds of ideas, like from, I can't find a parking space. Oh, let's make a parking app, to, the knee-high boots I'm wearing keep slouching. Okay, let's make something that keeps those boots from slouching. Really, it was not focused at all on a thing or even a product. Some of these things were services, but almost without fail, every idea we had got crossed off the list because we just didn't have cash to support the solution we'd come up with. A lot of times it was like, oh, let's make this app. And then the app designer was like going to charge $20,000 or something. So we're like, okay, that's not going to work. We came up with all kinds of ideas. We would have the meeting in my home in my apartment in LA because I had like a dining room table, and we would sip on my kombucha during this meeting. So like, it was almost really like, the universe just like, will you fucking start this thing already? But we didn't see it yet. So we would drink on the kombucha, come up with all these ideas. And basically we landed on it because Justin was working on the side for a guy who had a lot of success, an entrepreneur who had a lot of success selling a hair loss prevention product. And it was pretty crappy. It didn't really work, but he made a ton of money and had tons of orders. And Justin was just floored with how much success this guy had from like a product that barely even worked. And so he was kind of like, guys, if we could make a product for hair loss that actually works, like we could really have success too. So we started researching what would regrow hair. And of course, I was interested in finding something that was like holistic and maybe nutrition based, right? That's kind of where my background comes in. And we started finding all over the internet anecdotes and just stories of people that use the kombucha SCOBY, which is the culture that's used to make kombucha, as a mask on the head. And that if you, put it on once a week for like 5 weeks, you're going to see hair growth. So this became a realistic solution for us because we knew how to make kombucha. I knew how to make those SCOBYs. It wasn't going to cost me anything to make kombucha. I mean, just the cost of sugar, tea, and time. And Justin's hair was kind of starting to, thin out a bit. So we're like, great, we even have a guinea pig. And so we started on this sort of journey to make a bunch of kombucha, but not for the liquid. We didn't care about the liquid. We wanted to produce these cultures that then we would ultimately, save the world from baldness with. So that was the start. And we started making kombucha. I was making as much kombucha as I could make. And I had really good quality kombucha, so I didn't throw it out. I put it in cheap bottles I could buy at LA Bottle Supply. I bought the cheapest ones you could find, which happened to be amber, brown, Boston round stock bottles that were like 75% off because who would want an apothecary looking bottle? So bought those for 75% off, bottled my kombucha, and just put it in my closet. Like it was sort of like whenever a friend would come over, I would just give them a case because I just had it. And we would be making the kombucha again to gather these cultures because each batch you make, you get a culture. So like I would just basically be making kombucha to get a culture. And we had this opportunity. So we're doing this. This is taking a few weeks. We're now like maybe 6 weeks into this. I've probably made about 60 cases of kombucha that are just sitting in my apartment, starting to take over my living room. And we're about to get ready to put it on Justin's head. But we get a phone call from a friend of a friend. Vanessa's friend ran or managed Brentwood Farmers Market in LA. That farmers market is one of the best. It's like an 18-month wait to get in. So we knew that. And to have an opportunity to sell there is sort of one we didn't want to miss, especially since what you'll learn about the three of us is that we're sort of like turbo mode people. We often say yes before we're ready. So that friend, through a lunch with Vanessa, had learned that we were working on this hair project. And she said, hey, listen, we're trying to bring more like cosmetics and like, less farmer goods to the farmers markets. Do you guys want a space this summer? I'll give it to you from March to September. And her intent was that we would sell our hair loss product. And we hadn't even created one yet. All I had was a bunch of SCOBYs and we were about to test it on Justin. But we were like, yeah, we do. Yeah, we definitely want that spot. We'll take it. It's $150 a week rent. And, we were going to, and the only, catch was that we had to be ready to sell something in a couple weeks. So the way that we saw it, we're like, how hard can this be? Let's make a product and we'll sell it and we'll figure it out. And we didn't think at this point that this was going to be like the game changing moment or like the, the business that was going to, define us. We were just like, whatever, we're going to learn. We're going to learn this summer. We're going to sell in the fucking farmers markets. Let's just see how this goes. We spent one afternoon mixing the scobies, the cultures, with like avocados and different things to try to make a high quality mask that we could then package and sell for $100. And needless to say, we realized it only took one afternoon to realize that was going to be harder than we thought. Making a super high quality hair mask was not something that we were, going to be able to do in 2 weeks. So we sort of looked at the wall next to us as we were mixing scobies in a bowl, and we saw those cases of kombucha, and we were just like, all right, we're pivoting. That's what we're selling. And so we made a label. I drew a label. We had the brown bottles, so we really felt like we would just double down on that apothecary look. And plus that made sense from like, the fact that we think kombucha is like a healthy drink. So, I kind of drew something on paper. We sent it to a friend, and for $20 or $50 or something like that, he made a label for us, and we printed it literally on our at-home printer and scotch taped it onto the bottles and sold out in an hour.
Oh my God.
And listen, the way I tell the story, it's kind of like, and the rest was history, like eight years later, and we have seen a lot of success on the growth side in 8 years. And I'm so grateful for that, but it has not been easy. It has not been a simple journey. And it has taken a lot of work, and, it's been my life's work, really. I really feel like it's been my purpose the whole time. Anyway, so that's how we started. And I think the lesson in it for me, looking back, is I don't know. I mean, we happened to hit on a very cool project that I think was at the beginning of a very strong wave. Like, we weren't the first kombucha to enter the market, and a lot of the kombucha companies that had been there had already paved the way. And so we came in with a strong brand, really strong energy, a really good liquid. And we just we just participated in that wave as it grew. And then we helped contribute to it too. So, we did definitely come in at the right place at the right time. But I also think there was a lot of just putting it out there and getting a product in the market before you're ready. No, the labels weren't perfect. No, it wasn't even on a sticker. It didn't even have a nutrition facts panel. And we just showed up, and the reality was it worked. And, the second week we had the same sort of effect. And then the summer sort of told us that, hey, you've got something here. And so by the end of the year, we quit our jobs and gave it a go full time. And that was a super scary moment too, that I know a lot of entrepreneurs need sort of hand-holding through, because it doesn't make sense to do that when you don't have any money, to quit your job and start something else. So, I talk to people about that too. But that's how it started, and that's sort of how we landed on something. And again, we never knew that kombucha was going to be the big thing. It was more that we just couldn't wait, and we just said yes, and we figured it out as we went.
So it's like, I just sat there during you talking and telling that story with a giant smile on my face. Like, that's the best. But I have some questions and things that stuck out to me. I think the first one, I think there are two massive points that I think are so cool. Like the first one is the entrepreneurship club that you created, and just showing up with problems, thinking through them a little bit, figuring out they're not viable, scrapping them, going to the next. I think that it's kind of goofy to say oh, we're going to do an entrepreneurship club, the three of us each weekend.
Yeah.
But those are the types of things that work, that you have to create a culture of action. And you clearly have this massive bias towards action. And that was the first part of making this all happen. It's so cool to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is a first step. And maybe that's a simple sort of good direction to give somebody who says they want to do something. It's all right, sit down with a pen and paper, start coming up with ideas, knock them out.
Yep.
Because you'll see pretty quickly, after a week, we were able to knock out, it was rare that we had a project we continued to look into more than a week, because it was pretty quick that we saw, okay, too much competitors, or we don't have any knowledge in this, or we don't have the money. There's always something that just made it a clear kind of, nope, not going to work, not going to work, not going to work, not going to work. And eventually when we got to the kombucha, when we got to the hair loss thing, it was sort of hey, this could work. This could work. And so we kept going on it. And then of course, life threw us a different sort of set of cards, and we took them. And here we are today, 8 years later, with a legitimate business, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd say so. But I think that's what's cool is that you went through these problems and you landed on one. There's this I was talking to someone maybe probably at the end of 2019, and they were saying like, what types of companies do you think will succeed in 2020? And I always have three that I'm like, this will always be a problem that people will want to spend money on, will want to fix. And it's like baldness, sex stuff, babies, and kids. And those are the things that are actual problems that are, when you look at people's hierarchy of problems, they're in the top one or two always. And so you can get attention. So it's not surprising that you got this spot for that. And it probably also taught you like, what does traction look like? Like, what does interest look like? And then you saw it at the farm stand, and it was obvious.
Yeah.
I also think that's really cool that you were able to get in a channel that people already trusted. And so like right away, it was like, this is something that deserves your attention. And then it was like everything sort of lined up from the market, the movement, all of that. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of luck, but also a lot of just get into it. Like you said, I think just getting into action. That's one of the first things I try to help entrepreneurs through, because they often are stuck with this feeling that they have to perfect an idea first. And the beautiful thing about the farmers market too, I think is something that, maybe people don't think of it as like a route to market they want to consider, but in some ways it's an awesome one, because it's not a huge amount of overhead to get into. It doesn't take a long time. You're able to exchange with the consumer directly and like face to face. So you're seeing their reaction when they drink it. You see which flavors they like. You see what pitch works better than others. Like in a matter of a day, I can hone it. I mean, Justin and I and Vanessa used to play games. We'd be like, all right, today's Pink Lady Apple Day. And we would just sell Pink Lady Apple. And of course, the sales for Pink Lady Apple would be like quadruple what the other flavors were. And it's like, it taught us so much about how to properly position it. It's almost like A/B testing, but like in real life.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think the farmers market also was a key to our success in the beginning, because we didn't have cash. We didn't have access to all these insights. And like, maybe you can get all of that another way, but it works too, just to like kind of get on the ground and do it. Roll up your sleeves and just sell it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's an amazing lesson to try and figure out how can you create that sort of atmosphere where you're getting tight feedback loops with your customer early, learning how to sell, all that. Awesome. So I have a couple questions there. So like, you sell out, and you guys it was probably an amazing feeling. It was probably really exciting. Then I would imagine it became pretty real, where you had to make a decision like, all right, is this the thing that we're going to do or not? I'm curious about that conversation. And like, even thinking through it for a second, I'm like, right now, I would be like, man, I don't know about supply chain. I'm going to have to sell to grocery stores. What does that mean? Like, all of those things would stress me out and become very intimidating. I'm curious about how you guys thought about it and handled it.
Yeah. And listen, I think it's great that there are people like you that think through the things that could go wrong. And perhaps because of all of that we had access to, maybe it was the best thing that we weren't like that. Because now I rely on those people in my business for real. So I'm very grateful you guys, exist. We were very, we always had this incredibly grandiose vision and drive that, like, when we started Health-Ade and it started working, we were like, oh, Health-Ade's going to be in every fridge in America by the end of next year. Like, that was sort of our grandiose idea and vision, but we didn't really build the plan. We were more short-term focused, even though we had a super grandiose long-term vision. And it was just about figuring it out one step at a time, essentially. And I actually think that was a really important part of our story, because if I walked so today I've got, over 200 employees. We're vertically integrated. We manufacture in-house in Torrance. I've got more than, $15 million worth of stainless steel and glass and equipment that are, manufacturing 7 days a week at like efficiencies that I never imagined. Like, if I'd walked into that brewery at the beginning, that might have been discouraging enough for me to quit the whole project, because I would have said, I have no idea how to build that. Like, no idea. But yet here I am, having had no idea how to build that, and I built that. Now, obviously with the help of others, but I didn't have to know how to build that back then. I didn't have to know the plan. I didn't even know how. I didn't need to know anything about it. All I needed to know was how I was going to get to the next step. And that was a really, I think, important thing that the three of us understood intuitively. We didn't let that future plan like get in our heads too much. We started in the farmers markets, and we started seeing that store owners, like mom pop store owners, would come to the markets and they would be like, oh, I want to sell this in my store. Can I buy 10 cases? And we'd be like, well, that'll basically clean us out. So how about we deliver you 10 cases on Tuesday? And so we started this sort of like on-demand wholesale delivery around LA to mom pop stores. And we really quickly realized that wholesale was where the money was at. Like, you'd sell 10, 20, 30 cases in one setting, and it was done over the phone. You could deliver it by car versus somebody slaving in the hot sun every single weekend to sell half that. So it was sort of like, we quickly realized, okay, wholesale's where we go. How do we, and we would revisit, as a team, how do we change our capabilities to be more wholesale driven? How do we start opening more accounts? So the business sort of, as we watched the business evolve and the demands evolve, we evolved with it. And so soon we created roles for the three of us, and one person's entire role was to go open up wholesale accounts. And as those wholesale accounts got bigger and bigger, we kind of became a distribution company. Because in the beginning, I was delivering cars out of my Honda Civic, but then there's only so many cases you can fit in your Honda Civic, 36 to be exact. And, when orders started to get bigger than that, or days of orders started to get bigger than that, it's like, okay, we need a van. So we figured out how to get a van, and then the van became too big, and then we needed to hire a driver. And then there was this point where we're like, wait, are we really going to hire like a third driver and a second van? Like, is this how we want to go? Do we want to become a distribution company too? And so that's when we sort of revisited and said, no, this is when we unlock third-party distribution. And so then we started going to distributors, and as distributors came, orders came even bigger. And that, of course, drove the need for us to drive our manufacturing to be bigger. And so over the course of manufacturing, it didn't start in my kitchen, and then the next brewery we built was the one I'm in today. We've had 4 iterations, and each iteration made sense as the next step from where we were. Like, we had to go from A to B to C to D. So now I think that with capital and experience and knowledge, you don't have to do it that way. And that's the beautiful thing about business. There's a million ways to do it, and there's a million right ways to do it. The right ways are the ways that work. And for me, this happened to work, but it's possible that you could skip all of that A to B to C to D if you've got a little more capital, a little bit more time, a little more patience. Maybe your mindset is such that you think through those sort of threats and weaknesses, and you don't have to do what we did, which was basically constantly work through the problems. I don't know. All I can say is I've done this once, and that's how we did it.
Very cool. And it's such a good point. I've worked with so many startups now. I skip ahead to things that just aren't relevant now at all. And there's no need to worry about a risk that may or may not come up in 2 years. So you mentioned talking around the moment of quitting your job. I think that's a really cool thing to hone in on for a second.
Yeah.
So you guys are working for a while, it sounds like, with your jobs. You're going to farmers markets on the weekend. I imagine you're making this stuff in your kitchen and at big quantities.
Yeah.
What was that decision like to quit? And were all 3 of you on the same page?
Yeah. So one of the beautiful things about the 3 of us is that we are on the same page, not with every single problem, and how we're going to solve it, but with the general, we have equal desire and passion to bring this product or this brand to every household in America. And we all have the same level of sort of drive to win. I think that's a really important point, because a lot of issues can erupt when you've got founders that have differing passion and willingness to devote to a project. So with us, I think part of our, sort of recipe for success was definitely that the 3 of us were all in and equally all in. But yeah, basically what happened that summer was we were working our tails off every waking moment to drive this brand forward. And it started as a weekend thing. Then it was every night of the week. And then it was every waking hour. We got to this point where we were so ragged, we were just run thin. And, somewhere around September, October of that year, that first year, 2012, where we all just kind of realized we were at our max, and we weren't going to be able to keep growing this thing and delivering what was clearly capable of. It was clear that we had this capability to build this into something bigger. At that point, it was tough to keep up with the demand. We were driving the demand too, but it's we weren't even hitting our, let's just say there was a lot of low hanging fruit, and we couldn't even pick all the fruit. So it was sort of we knew there was potential. We had enough information and insight to tell us we had something. But what we didn't have is any more energy or time. And we were already doing pretty shitty jobs at our normal jobs. So it was sort of we weren't doing either the right service. And we just sat down and we're here's what we asked for. So are we going to do it? Are we going to do it? Are we going to quit our jobs and freaking give this a go? And, the consensus was yes. And it wasn't exactly clear how we were going to figure out the financials. I think the three of us had like a few months of rent at least saved up. Health-Ade wasn't paying us by any means. So we had enough to figure out the next 3 months. Against the advice of all of our parents and friends, we quit our jobs by the end of 2012. And starting January 3rd, 2013, we showed up and we're like, oh shit. Like, what did we just do? I mean, we love what we just did, but we were like, it became so real that not only was there no paycheck coming, but that we had just made this very sort of drastic move. And we were not going to let this tarnish our reputation, our drive. And so it just made us work 1,000 times harder. And by the way, we had more time, right? So now where I was putting before 6 hours a day or something, now I have like a full 12, 14 hours a day to apply this thing, and a lot of motivation, a lot to prove. And again, we already had the brand off the ground. So it was like, at this point, there was quite a bit of work that was before us that was like obvious. It wasn't like I was quitting to then just start the idea. So revenues quickly responded. And, what's funny is that's a marquee moment for us, the quitting of our jobs, not just because emotionally it was important that we devoted ourselves fully, but that extra work and time that was put into the business, like translated very like linearly, if not more, to a reward. Like it was like, oh, through us sitting down for a day and realizing like writing down how we were going to get to where we needed to get to basically pay us just a salary enough to live on. We realized there was no way we could open up that number of doors that we needed to in the time we'd need it before we ran out of rent money. So it was like in that first week that we realized, okay, we need people. We need people like troops on the ground to be opening accounts like stat. And within 4 weeks, we had 20 independent sales reps working for us. Literally an ad I posted on Craigslist for people who love kombucha, who wants to work for us. And we didn't pay them unless they got, like, it was commission only. So basically any account they brought in, as soon as that account wrote us a check, they got 10% of it.
Wow.
And then they got 10% of it like forevermore, as long as they kept working for us. So it was sort of a good side project job for the yoga teacher that loved kombucha and the, actress or actor that like had some extra time on their hands and loved kombucha, because we would also give free kombucha. So that's how we got started. And it wouldn't have been like, I don't think we would have realized that had I not had the mind space to sit down and look at the business and say, okay, we need X number of dollars per week to just live. We're not going to make that happen the way we're going with just the three of us. So it was just like, it was a marquee moment because it helped us look at the business and not just work on the business. And that sort of translated to bigger growth.
That's so interesting. So you were sort of like, while you had your jobs, you were learning about how impactful this business could be, learning about customers, learning about where to sell. And then you sort of pivoted from like learn mode to grow mode and built the infrastructure for that. I mean, what a fearless decision that is, like to sit down and look at the finances and say, we don't have enough. This won't work at our current rate. We need to bring in people. I don't think most people would make that decision. I think it would be like, well, how can maybe we'll work on weekends or whatever. But like that was the decision that needed to be made. That's great.
Yeah. Like our I think if you could say one thing about the three of us, like it would be that we are on offense all the time.
Yeah. It's like, I have notes next to me and like big letters. I have like bias towards action and then just fearless underlined like 5 times.
The funny thing is it was very scary. So I mean, we were, throwing up. I mean, anxiety was at an all-time high. I don't think it wasn't fearless, but it was maybe I don't know what the other word is, but certainly scary. Holy moly, was it scary. I mean, every day I woke up and I thought, I'm not going to call my parents because, I'm pretty close to like getting kicked out of my apartment and living out of my car. Like, it was not, it wasn't just easy to be like that, but for whatever reason that the three of us naturally have an inclination toward being on offense. So even during like these COVID times where a lot of my colleagues, everybody's impacted by this. I mean, sure, there's some businesses that are benefiting, but most companies are impacted. And I'm seeing a lot of them contract lay off people, contract, cut expenses, cut costs. And I know that makes a lot of logical sense. But there's
Mhm.
also other things you can consider. Because my natural thought
Mhm.
was, what do we do to turn this into a win for us? What do we do to turn this into a strong chapter for Health-Ade where we can maybe even help people who have lost their jobs by providing more jobs? And, you know,
Mhm.
like it just naturally is the way that we are, I think, to not think of like restricting and constricting first, but to go toward another potential solution, which is more offensive or not offensive to people,
Mhm.
but like on offense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, totally. That's a great perspective. I have a question about that a little bit about like the mental side of that. So you mentioned sort of offhand, and if it wasn't important and it wasn't a big deal, then we don't have to talk about it. But I do think that when people decide to go all in on something, like everyone's supportive when you're working on a startup on the side. And then when you say that you're going to do it full time,
Yes.
everything changes. And friends are like, ooh, and your family's like, oh, maybe not.
Yes. They're like, why
And
don't
all
you wait
this.
till the business is profitable enough? And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yes, 100% that happened.
So that's my question is like the mental side of that of like everyone telling you what you're doing is maybe not the right thing to do, but like inside you know it is, but that's still generally in life when like everyone tells you not to do something, like you should maybe listen,
Yeah.
but in this case you shouldn't. I'm just curious about the mental side of that.
Yeah, I really, so the tagline we have on our bottles, follow your gut. That is not just a directional, tagline to tell you about the fact that kombucha's got gut benefits.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it really was a business mantra, especially in the beginning, because
Mm,
what happened in those conversations, and I think you always listen to people's opinions, but you don't have to do what they say. And,
mm,
there are going to be times, I think by definition, if everybody agreed with what you were doing, it would be done way more. And
mm,
if it made logical sense, it would be done way more. And that's just not the case. So I feel like for business, it's okay if you find yourself in a position where like you want to go a different way, but yet everybody is telling you not to. It's okay. That's actually probably the price of entry. So maybe that's even an indication that you're on the right track.
mm-hmm,
But just because other people don't agree, it certainly shouldn't be a reason to hold back. And what you have to do is really tap into your gut. Like, I mean, I hate to say it,
mm-hmm,
but when I had those conversations, it was like I can remember it to this day. It was my dad telling me, "Wait until the business has profits and can actually pay you what you
mm,
need before you quit." Vanessa's mom wrote her an
mm.
Excel doc with like pros and cons, and there was like 1,000 pages of cons, and there was one pro, and the pro was you might succeed. You know, the head games that our friends and family, not head games, of course they're there to protect us, but yeah, I mean the energy around this was all as soon as it was time to quit our jobs, it was all very sort of quote unquote unsupportive.
Mm,
But like the feeling in the gut when they're talking to me is you're wrong. You're wrong and this is
mm-hmm,
going to work and I have to do this. And it just I don't know how to say it except that you've got to really tap into that. Yeah. And there's other examples of this by the way in our story, like even after we had an established business a little bit and we had our first investment, my investors first came in and said, this is just one example, but it happens all the time. My investors came in and said, okay, you got to move away from the brown bottles because everybody in beverage
mm,
sells in clear bottles and people buy because of the colorful, cue for flavor and taste that comes through when you sell clear. And so like, yeah, next run of bottles, let's look at clear. And I just remember that same feeling coming up that was like my intuition telling me
mm,
no, like we have a differentiated product because we're in a brown bottle. Not to mention the fact that it protects the probiotics, the brown bottle.
mm,
It also feels like the wrong move to go to look like everybody else. And
mm-hmm,
so I listened, but I sort of put my foot down and said, I agree with you on reasons, the other things you brought up, but not on the brown bottle thing. We're not going to do that. It wasn't a big deal. They kind of said, okay, all right, move
mm-hmm,
on. And in the end, I was right. The brown bottle ended up
mm-hmm,
being a huge marketing advantage for us to say we're the one in the brown bottle in the beginning before people knew our name. And
mm-hmm.
funny enough, now a lot of the companies are moving toward a brown bottle. So I there are examples of that too where I was wrong. It's not that you're always right, but I do think what you have to listen to is that sort of fire within that says, no, I don't agree with this and I want to do something different. And that's okay. In fact, if you didn't have that, you could put the question into Google and it would spit back what you should do. And that's of course not the case. Business
Mm,
really is a journey of your own decisions. It's a journey of your own problem solving and how you chose to solve these problems, and it's manifested in some kind of service or product. That's business, and so it's yours. It's your decision to make.
incredible. I love that. And I think on that point is something that I definitely wanted to touch on, was brand in general. So like when I hear about the backgrounds of the founders, I might be wrong, but I didn't hear anything about creating a brand or certainly like design or something like that. And I for a long time, so my girlfriend introduced me to Health-Ade years ago, and I didn't know that there was other kombucha. Like I thought that was it's just such a strong and disciplined brand and differentiated brand. I'm just curious about how you were able to stay so disciplined with it, and like has it always sort of looked like this, or what are the conversations around brand like early and then now?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought this up because brand actually was a really big part of our conversation from the beginning. So when
Mm,
we did decide that we were going to sell a kombucha, so even before the first time we sold a bottle, but when we were like designing the label,
mm,
we definitely were like, okay, this is what we're doing. It wasn't like, oh, let's see how this sells the first market. We were definitely like, all right, this summer we're going to, we were sort of, I don't want to say idiots, but we had like,
mm.
I told you about our grandiose ideas. So we were literally like, okay, this summer we're going to make $1 million. And, definitely did not happen. Not even close. But, but we were like, all right, so to do that, we have to, and we kind of did a bit of an exercise. Like, and I think part of this comes from the leadership training that I had, to be honest. Like I had learned
Mhm.
in my change agent days that like aligning on a big purpose and like, vision and articulating extraordinary goals and like, so, I kind of sat the team together and I'm like, how do we do this? What do we want to be like? Oh, we want to be like Nike. All right, so let's look what Nike does.
Mm,
And it was sort of very clear that we were going to be not just a really awesome liquid, but in order to be successful, we'd also need to have an extremely strong, disciplined, engaging brand that has a position that's compelling and emotional. So even though we didn't have any classic training in brand, what we did was looked at some of our favorite brands and tried to pull basically away what were the similar things and
mm,
apply those for our brand. So yeah, I know I did kind of gloss over like, oh, we sent it to a friend for $50, but like it wasn't just any friend. This friend designed, the CD case for like the Foo Fighters albums, and
wow.
he was really a strong graphics guy. And
Mm,
and we were inspired by the apothecary look, and he was able to like hit a pretty awesome home run for the first label. But yes, it did evolve. It totally evolved because that label wasn't even legal.
mm,
It had a clip art anchor, but we evolved it as we got investment. We got stronger designers. But to this day, for me, it's all about the brand. Like
mm,
the liquid is important. I mean, there's three really important things I think when I think about the success of Health-Ade, and it's for sure the liquid. The liquid's got to be awesome. The product has to be awesome. But that's almost like the price of entry. The second is the execution, the people. Like you've got to be able to execute on a plan and like actually deliver on what you set out to do. You got to act.
mm,
And your team has to act. And so we've been able to grow fast, I think, because the team has been really good at like rowing in the right direction and in the same direction because the wheels shake for sure. So a strong team and a strong focus is key so that they don't fall off.
mm,
But the third thing, and arguably maybe even the most important, is a strong brand. So it's always been a
mm.
focus. Like, right, we're going to launch something this summer that's exciting, but I can't talk about it too much. But we're going to launch something this summer, and I mean, I've had my brand team on, night shift hours because I just
Mm,
want to get this so freaking right, man, that it's a no-brainer
mm.
home run. So no, we're not
Yep.
just like, oh, this worked. The brand is serious
Mm.
thing. Yeah. I care about
Yeah,
the
and
freaking fonts in the emails.
I mean, it comes through. It couldn't come through anymore if I had to name brands of like any drink. Like you're certainly it's like it's ridiculously strong, and like the first impression is great. The visibility is great. It's tremendous. You've done a great job, and I'm confident the next whatever's coming out this summer will be as well.
Thank you.
So I want to be cognizant of time, so I'm gonna give us one more question
Cool.
to kind of end things on. This has been very helpful, very inspiring, and I think one of the things that might be really great for our founders is a bunch of them are working on startup ideas while they have a full-time job. For our listeners, I should say, what would your advice be for those folks who are trying to like get the next step, trying to get to the point where they can quit their job and do this thing full-time?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be a little bit what we talked about in the beginning. Start writing some things down on paper. If you're there, if you already have the idea and you know what it is, put it out there. Put it out there before you're ready. What's interesting is as I find people who have done things successfully, and I ask them this same question almost always, and I'm talking like I think it's 100%. They've told me that they put the product or service out there before they were ready. And so I wonder if that's a very important piece of this, because like we talked about in the beginning, a plan is only a plan, and it's usually not going to happen the way you expect. And so what you're doing by putting something out early is, betting that you're going to solve the problems as they come. You're betting on yourself, you're betting on your team, you're betting on your product or whatever, but you're not over and analyzing what might happen. I mean, obviously like COVID is a great example. Like nobody's plan is going to plan this year, but the companies that are going to win through this are the ones that can evolve and adapt quickly. And so having that mindset as an entrepreneur, I think is key. You've got an idea, go with it, give it a shot, put it out there. Don't wait till the blog or the label or the whatever is perfect. So many people I talk to are like, I've made this product, but in October, it's going to be this % better because, this co-packer can do this or whatever. And I'm like, great. So sell it now and then sell it better in October. That's to me, at least, I think. And again, I'm no business, like I've done one business and it's working, but so I wouldn't say I'm a guru or anything. I think I got to do at least 2 right to be called anything. But my intuition tells me getting out there before you're ready, getting it out there, taking action is the key step. It's like, just do it.
Awesome. I love it.
So whether it's writing things on paper or going out there and just trying to sell it, whatever it is, it's taking action.
Awesome. Let's end on that. That was so good. I love betting on yourself to solve the problems as they come. That's so freaking good. Well, Daina, thank you so much. This was terrific. Really, really helpful. Really inspiring. What's your favorite flavor?
Okay, so I usually say pomegranate because that is like all time my fave, but actually right now my favorite is jalapeno kiwi cucumber. Ooh. And it's my favorite because it feels like I'm drinking a margarita, but it doesn't have the alcohol, and even with the alcohol, it's good too. So nice. That's my new favorite, jalapeno kiwi cucumber.
Everybody get that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, man.
Thanks for listening. Head over to the website and grab yourself some Health-Ade Kombucha. And if you've got a startup idea, head to gettacklebox.com or email me at brian@gettacklebox.com. Have a great week.